Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another weekly episode of Everything Vaguely Paranormal. As always, I am Blake Smith, and with me is my partner in the paranormal, Miss Shelley Pruitt, and our wonderful fill-in special guest host, Mr. Chad Wandell with Ghost Geeks. How are y'all doing tonight?
Doing good. It seems like both Chad and I have had a day. So,
yeah. I'm ready for a good story. That's for sure.
Me too.
I got the appropriate beverage.
Yes,
I don't have a beverage, Mr. Chad Wandell.
Well, you knew we were doing this.
I know. I should have had a beverage, but I didn't.
Yes, I know that y'all both have had a day, so we are going to jump into our story. We are going to be discussing the Villisca Axe Murder House. So I know, Shelley, obviously, you and I have been there. Chad, have you been there?
I have not.
You have not. Okay.
I have not.
So do y'all know much of the full story of the Villisca Axe murders and what took place in the house?
I know a little bit, but I've intentionally tried to not know a lot because I want to go in blind when I go. Okay. I don't want to know, but this is going to blow that. So
yeah,
this is going to blow that. Yes. If you go to investigate, this is
unless you're just lying. And then this has no bearing.
Yeah. No, I will not be lying.
I know.
I will, yes, I will say this is going to be a difficult case. And I'm going to sit here and say that I am not going to wash over what happened to these victims. There are children involved in this story, if you are unaware of that. So I do want to make that very well known. It was horrific what happened to these victims. But I believe in telling the full story, not washing over it, no matter what. And this is a very, very hard case. Yeah. That's a reason why it's been 114 years and it still remains unsolved. And we just passed the anniversary of this taking place on June 10th. So literally like 6 days ago. So yeah, pretty insane. Had I not had to push this, I would have actually been doing the episode on the anniversary of the Villisca Axe murders, which is insane. I had to push it by a week because I didn't have all my research complete. So I wanted to give you all a full story. But anyways, yes, it's been 114 years. So
nice.
Anyways, let's jump into this.
I'm excited. Let's go.
All right. June 10th, 1912 began like any other summer morning in Villisca, Iowa. The sun was rising over the rolling farmland of Montgomery County while farmers were preparing for another day in the fields. Shopkeepers were opening their doors and neighbors were tending livestock and beginning their daily routines. But at one small white house on East 2nd Street, something felt eerily quiet. The curtains were still closed, the horses had not been tended, and no one answered the door. Just hours earlier, the home had been filled with life as the occupants had returned home from church service that Sunday evening. By the end of the morning, the town would discover that all 8 of them were dead. The Villisca Axe murders remain one of the most brutal and perplexing unsolved crimes in American history. The investigation would span years, generate countless theories, and accuse everyone from a traveling preacher to one of the most powerful men in Iowa politics. The Villisca Axe murders are one of those cases that feel almost impossible to fully grasp. 8 people were murdered in one home. 6 of them were children. The crime scene was chaotic. The investigation was flawed from the beginning. And over the years, the case became tangled in rumors, accusation, political influence, private detectives, confessions, and theories that still divide people more than a century later. At the center of the story is the Moore family, Joe and Sarah Moore. Their 4 children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, and 2 young sisters, Lena and Ina Stillinger, who had simply gone home with the Moore family. But what happened in Villisca didn't end when the sun came up on June 10th. In many ways, that was only the beginning. Over the next several years, investigators would chase leads across multiple states. Suspects would be identified, dismissed, arrested, and debated. A confession would eventually emerge. So would accusations against some of the most prominent people in town. And over 100 years later, people are still arguing about what walked into that house that night. So we're going to go all the way back to the beginning. I will tell you one of the coolest things that I did find out while researching this case. And I want to put it in right here. Lena and Ina Stillinger, the 2 girls, the 2 neighbor girls or family friend girls. I am actually on the same generational line of them related to them, which is pretty compelling with evidence that we're going to be showing you later when we actually stepped into the Villisca Axe Murder House and did a spirit dissection with Lena and Ina Stillinger with multiple people present later on. I thought that was very interesting. Yes, we are very distant cousins, but the fact that I land on the same generational line in our trees as those two blew me away. I got like chills that went all over my body whenever I saw that. I was like, holy crap.
That's interesting. I wonder if they're on the same generational tree as me too, because you and I are what, like
I don't know,
fifth or sixth cousins,
fifth
or
or
something
sixth,
like that.
something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, Blake and I are actually related. Did you know that, Chad Mondale?
Fun story.
Distant, but we are.
Yeah, distant. Yeah, again, Lena and Ina Stillinger, very distant cousins. But when I saw that they were on the same generational line as me, I was like, my jaw dropped. I was like, holy shit. I wonder if that has any correlation to the communication that we got later on, which we'll be showing at the end of this episode. So to understand why the murder shocked the nation, we first need to understand the town where they occurred. By 1912, Villisca had grown into a prosperous farming and railroad community in southwestern Iowa. The arrival of the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad transformed the town from a small prairie settlement into a regional center for commerce and agriculture. Businesses lined the town square, churches and schools served a growing population, and families arrived seeking opportunity. By the turn of the century, roughly 2,500 people called Villisca home. And like many small towns of the era, Villisca was deeply interconnected. Business relationships overlapped with political relationships. Family ties stretched across generations. People knew who held influence, who was successful, and who was struggling. Trust was often built over years, and reputations carried weight. That interconnected nature would become one of the defining challenges in the investigation that followed. When the murders occurred, they did not happen in a city where the victims were strangers to the neighbors. The family were church members, customers, classmates, friends, and relatives. Nearly everyone in town knew them or knew someone who did. At first, investigators looked for strangers, drifters, and anyone who might have passed through town unnoticed. But as the weeks turned into months, some people began looking closer to home. And that's when the story starts to shift, because long before the murders, there was already a connection between two men who were well known in Villisca. And that is Frank Fernando Jones and Josiah Joe Moore. Now, Frank Jones, few people embodied the success of Villisca more than Frank Fernando Jones. By 1912, Jones had become one of the most powerful and influential men in southwestern Iowa. Wealthy, politically connected, deeply involved in both business and civic life, he was the kind of man whose name carried weight, not only in Villisca, but throughout the region. But his rise didn't happen overnight. He was born in New York in 1855 and moved west with his family as a young man before eventually settling in Iowa. He spent his early years teaching school and working on farms, but he possessed an ambition that extended far beyond rural life. After moving to Villisca during the town's economic expansion, he quickly established himself as a capable businessman and began building what would become a remarkably successful career. Over the next several decades, Jones accumulated influence through a combination of hard work, business acumen, and political ambition. He operated farm implement businesses, invested in banking, acquired real estate, and developed relationships with farmers and business owners throughout the area. And by the turn of the century, he had become one of the community's most recognizable figures. But Frank Jones was a man who inspired very different opinions, depending on who was asked. Supporters saw him as intelligent, disciplined, and driven. He was active in the Methodist Church, taught Sunday school, served on the city council, and developed a reputation as a moral and civic-minded leader. He entered politics in 1903, winning election to the Iowa House of Representatives, where he quickly gained influence. And after serving multiple terms, he set his sights on an even higher office, preparing a campaign for the Iowa Senate in 1912. Others, however, viewed Jones differently. Before becoming a prominent businessman, Jones had worked as a bookkeeper and debt collector for a local hardware company. Collecting overdue accounts from struggling farmers was rarely a popular job, and some remembered him as ruthless, calculating, and unwilling to bend once he had made a decision. As his wealth and influence grew, so too did the number of people who questioned his motives or resented his success. Now, whether those criticisms were fair or not, one thing was undeniable. By 1912, Frank Jones stood near the top of Villisca's social, financial, and political hierarchy. It was through his business ventures, though, that he would become connected to a former employee and rising businessman, Joe Moore. Now, if Frank Jones represented wealth, influence, and political power in Villisca, Joe Moore represented something much closer to the experience of most of the town's residents. He was a husband, a father, a businessman, and by nearly every single account, one of the most genuinely liked men in the community. Joe was born in Illinois, but moved to Iowa with his family while still young. He grew up on a farm south of Villisca where he learned the kind of work ethic common among rural Midwestern families at the turn of the century. As he grew older, he entered the farm implement business and quickly discovered he had a talent for it. He was a natural salesman, not because he was aggressive or calculating, but because people trusted him. And that trust became one of his defining qualities. Friends, neighbors, and customers consistently described Joe as friendly, outgoing, and approachable. He enjoyed conversation, remembered people by name, and seemed to have an easy way of making others feel comfortable. Those traits helped him build strong relationships throughout the community and contributed to his success in business. For a time, he managed and was an employee of Frank Jones at one of Jones's implement stores before eventually establishing himself independently and as a direct competitor to Jones. In 1899, Joe married Sarah Montgomery, beginning a partnership that would become the center of his life. Like Joe, Sarah had been born in Illinois before her family settled in Iowa. Those who knew her remembered a woman devoted to her family, active in her church, and deeply respected within the community. Together, Joe and Sarah built a life that reflected the values shared by many families in small-town Iowa: hard work, faith, stability, and a commitment to raising their children in a close-knit community. And over the next several years, they welcomed 4 children into their home. The oldest son, Herman, was born in 1901. Catherine followed in 1903, and then Boyd in 1905, and Paul in 1907. By the summer of 1912, the Moore household was filled with the energy and noise that naturally came with 4 growing children. School, church activities, chores, games, friendships, and family gatherings filled their days. Now, while detailed records about the children's personalities are limited, surviving accounts from family members, neighbors, and later researchers paint a picture of a close and well-liked family. Herman, at 11 years old, was often described as bright and a responsible boy who helped around the house and looked after his younger siblings. Catherine, age 10, was remembered as cheerful and friendly, with a close bond to both her brothers and her friends. Boyd, 7, was known as an active and energetic child, while 5-year-old Paul was the youngest of the family and often described as affectionate and playful. And the family lived in a modest 2-story house on East 2nd Street. It was not an especially large or impressive home, but it was comfortable and well cared for. The downstairs contained the kitchen, dining room, parlor, and a bedroom, while the upper floor held the family's sleeping quarters. Like countless homes across rural America, it was designed not for display, but for everyday living. The Moores were active members of their local Presbyterian church, which played an important role in community life in Villisca. Beyond religious service, the church served as a gathering place where friendships were formed, families stayed connected, and much of the town's social life unfolded. Joe and Sarah were well known within the congregation and throughout the community. Now, among the congregation were 2 sisters, Lena and Ina Stillinger. The girls were daughters of Joseph and Sarah Stillinger, who lived a few miles outside Villisca. Lena was 11 years old and Ina was 8. They were friends of the Moore children and were familiar faces within the church community. Like the Moore children, the Stillinger sisters have often been overshadowed by the mystery surrounding these murders. Yet those who knew them remember 2 young girls with distinct personalities and close family ties. Lena, the older sister, was described as mature for her age, intelligent and dependable. She reportedly enjoyed school and was considered a very good student. Family members later recalled her as a caring older sister who often helped look after Ina. Ina was remembered as lively, affectionate, and full of energy. At 8 years old, she was known for her playful nature and outgoing personality. Friends and relatives described her as a happy child who enjoyed spending time with other children and participating in church activities. The presence in the house that night would later become one of the most discussed aspects of the investigation, but at the time, there was nothing remarkable about their connection to the Moore family. They were simply 2 young girls spending the night with friends. So that is all the victims. I want to shed light on them, the house that show you a little bit of the house of what we're looking at, and kind of discuss here. Like Shelley, we've been there. Mm-hmm. This house is small. This house is very small. Quaint. There's not a whole lot of places for people to tuck away in or hide in, except for one area, which is upstairs, adjoined to where the parents slept, which was
is
the attic.
the attic area, which in
Mhm.
itself, the door is extremely small. Even I had to bend and kind of wiggle to. Normally I can walk through doors with no problem. Not this one. Not
Or
this one.
under tables.
Or under
Yeah.
tables. Yeah, I can. That's usually no problem. But I'm telling you, this door is so small. You literally have to kind of hunch down and kind of work your way through it. It's very small and very thin. It's not that easy to slip in and slip out of. In fact, I would say it was impossible. And the way this house is built, you take a step, everybody in the house knows where you are. It's just stacked on top of each other, and
Mhm.
it's wooden. So you'll hear the creaks, you'll hear the movement. So
Yeah.
anyway, that plays in
Yeah.
a minute. Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
I will point something out real quick. I don't know if she is related to these people or not, but the wife, Mrs. Moore, has a stunning resemblance to Christy Ayers.
Pull that picture back
Really?
up. Oh my God.
Oh, wow. I didn't think about
Like,
that.
as soon as I saw it, I was like, holy crap.
Yeah, she does. Wow. Christy Ayers, if you're watching, that might be something you might want to look into. Her
And so
maiden
this
name.
is Joe and who?
This
Sarah?
is Joe and Sarah Moore. Her maiden name
Right.
was Montgomery.
I mean, they look like they could be family, like hardcore.
I agree.
That's
Wow.
pretty scary. Wow. Pretty interesting. Christy, it might be something you might want to look into. But yes, so just to give you a rundown, the characters that we have come across so far are Frank Jones. He is the politician, the very well-known man in Villisca, Iowa. Again, you have Joe and Sarah Moore, who are the mother, father, husband, wife combo. That
Their
live in the
four
house.
children.
Their 4 children: Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, and Lena and Ina Stillinger. And they are all inside this very small house on the night of June 9th, 1912. So again, here's some of the pictures of the house. These were taken by us. Like this is from my phone camera, and this is actually zoomed out. So you know how you can like zoom it out to get more of the shot? Yeah, this is actually zoomed out on my phone.
Yeah, that's the entirety of the living room. And what you saw was the entirety of the kitchen.
Yeah. So I actually did not have pictures of the upstairs. I guess I just didn't freaking take them. So
Oh, I took them. Dang, you should have hollered at me.
It's all right.
Sent them to you.
It's all right. Yeah. They do tours at the house still. Yes, we had a comment on that. They do still do tours at the house, and you are able to visit and do overnights there as well. So, well, Sunday, June 9th, 1912 began as an ordinary day in Villisca. For Joe Moore, the day started much like countless others before it. After breakfast, he made his way to the post office to collect mail that had arrived late the prior evening. From there, he stopped by his implement business, greeting acquaintances along the way. After reading through the mail and tending to a few business matters, he returned home to spend the remainder of the day with his family. And as evening approached, attention turned toward the Presbyterian Church. The congregation had been preparing for a Children's Day program, a popular annual event that showcased the involvement of local children in church life. Families gathered to watch performances, recitations, songs, and presentations. For many in attendance, it was a highlight of the summer social calendar. And Sarah Moore played an active role in organizing the evening's activities, and the Moore children and the Stillinger girls were among those participating in the program. But another person would be in attendance that evening, a traveling minister named Reverend George Jacqueline Kelly. Kelly had arrived in the area after preaching at nearby communities and was staying with Reverend Ewing, the local Presbyterian pastor. At the time, there was nothing particularly remarkable about his presence. Traveling ministers frequently moved between small communities, filling pulpits and attending church functions, so few people paid him much attention that evening. And that same night, across the street, Frank Jones attended services at the Methodist Church. According to later accounts, he was seated near the back of the sanctuary, and some witnesses would later recall that Jones briefly left the church before returning to his seat. Now, whether that detail held any significance became a matter of debate years later, but on that Sunday evening, no one had reason to believe it was important. As the Children's Day program concluded around 9:30 p.m., families began saying their goodbyes and making their way home. It's around the same time that Joe Moore is seen speaking with Albert Jones, Frank Jones's son, in an alley near their homes. Several local boys later reported witnessing the conversation, though none could hear what was being said. And like many details connected to this case, the exchange would later attract scrutiny once investigators began searching for answers. For now, however, it appeared to be nothing more than two acquaintances talking on a summer evening. Shortly before leaving the church, arrangements were finalized for Lena and Ina Stillinger to spend the night with the Moore family. Once home, Joe Moore telephoned the Stillinger home, spoke with their sister Blanche, and confirmed the plans. The girls would stay with their friends and return home the following day. And it was sometime around 10 o'clock when Joe and Sarah Moore, their 4 children, and the 2 Stillinger girls settled into the home after closing the door behind them. After the Children's Day program concluded, Reverend George Kelly returned to the Presbyterian parsonage with Reverend Ewing and his wife. The 3 spent a short time visiting before retiring for the evening. And because of a medical condition that was aggravated by sleeping indoors, Mrs. Ewing often slept outside in a tent during the warmer months. Reverend Ewing accompanied his wife, while Reverend Kelly was given a room inside the house alone.
And Reverend Kelly is the traveling pastor,
Yep.
the Weasley-looking one.
Yes.
Yeah.
He gave me the heebie-jeebies right away. Like,
Reverend Kelly gave me the. Yeah,
this
he
is
looks Weasley.
Reverend Kelly. Yes,
Yeah.
He looks like he's
Reverend
going.
Kelly.
You look like you're delicious.
I was just thinking that. He looks.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Reverend Kelly is the traveling minister who is visiting Villisca this night, June 9th, 1912.
And he's staying with Reverend Ewing, who is the Presbyterian pastor.
Who's the Presbyterian pastor, who's the one that normally gives the sermons at the Presbyterian church where the Moore family attends, and so do the Stillinger girls. Frank Jones attends the Methodist church, which is across the street. I actually did a little bit of research on Villisca. I was actually able to find old Villisca maps from 1907, and you can actually see that 2 streets down from the Moore house is the Presbyterian church, and across the street from that is the Methodist Episcopalian church. And so they are still where they were today, though the original building for the Methodist church burned down in the 30s. They could not save it, so they razed it and built a new one. So the original building's no longer there, but the churches are still in the same spot where they were back in 1912. So I found that to be pretty cool, finding those maps.
So all of this is happening in like a 2 square block area then? Or?
Basically, it's one building, the 2nd Street, and then another building. So literally
really
across the street from one another, literally. Okay. And then basically you have the Presbyterian church, and you have a house. If you're going to the east, you have a house and a street, a house, and then the Moore's house. So they're literally like 2 streets down from their church. So it's not that far to walk. Everybody, it's a small town, all that kind of stuff. So they are very centrally located while all this is going on.
So everything's real tight here. It's not like 30 minutes that way. But
Correct.
Right.
The only ones that are outside of the area are the Stillinger home, which I believe was 7 miles outside of Villisca.
Okay.
That's the only one that is not local, which is probably why the Stillinger girls ended up with the Moore family. So,
damn.
Yeah. Well, according to later statements, Reverend George Kelly retired to his room in the Ewing home sometime between 10:30 and 11 p.m. and spent the night alone. Across town, Frank Jones returned home after attending his church services. His daughter, Letha, was staying with her parents at the time while awaiting a teaching assignment, and his son, Albert, obviously, that we've already talked about, and daughter-in-law, Donna, had just returned from a trip to Clarinda earlier that evening. So, everyone was accounted for. Now, Monday morning, June 10th, 1912, began like countless other mornings in Villisca. Just after 4 a.m., Mary Peckham woke in the house next door. Mary and her husband had lived beside the Moores for 15 years, long enough to know the family's habits almost by instinct, and in some reports was considered a grandmother figure to the Moore children. Almost instantly, Mary knew something was out of place. Joe Moore was known as a hardworking businessman and an early riser. Sarah Moore was equally industrious, and their household followed a very predictable pattern that Mary had observed for years. On a typical morning, there would already be signs of life shortly after sunrise. A curtain might be pulled back, a door might be opened. One of the children might appear outside, and the family would begin moving through the routines that marked the start of another day. But on June 10th, none of those things happened. As dawn approached, Mary noticed that the Moore house remained unusually quiet. At first, she thought little of it. The family had attended the children's program the previous evening, and the event had lasted late into the night. Perhaps everyone was simply sleeping later than usual. Yet as morning progressed, the silence persisted, and no one emerged from the home. So Mary continued on with her own chores, while occasionally glancing over at the neighboring home, until it just began to feel wrong. Mary tried to find reasonable explanations. Joe's father had been experiencing health problems. They lived on the south side of Villisca, a couple of miles out. Perhaps the family had received urgent news during the night, left unexpectedly, or that there was some other explanation she simply hadn't heard yet. But the questions persisted. If the family had left during the night, why were the animals unattended? Why had no one informed neighbors? Why did the house appear exactly as it had the evening before? So around 7 a.m., Mary decided to check on the family herself. She walked next door. She approached the house. She knocked on the front door and she waited. There was no answer. So she knocked again. The silence on the other side of the door felt unnatural. So she tried to listen for a moment for movement, but there was none. So nervously, she reached down and she grabbed for the doorknob on the front door, and she tried to turn that, but it was locked. So she decided to look around the property. Morning chores and animals remained untouched, and that alone was enough to deepen her concern. Joe Moore was not the sort of man to neglect his responsibilities, and neither was Sarah. The condition of the property suggested to her that something had interrupted the household before the day ever began. Yet even then, Mary did not imagine murder. Few people would have. But concerned and still searching for innocent explanations, Mary turned the chickens loose so they could feed and returned to her own house. And the situation bothered her enough that she finally decided to contact someone from the family. So she telephoned Joe Moore's brother, Ross. Some accounts say she spoke to Ross, and others say that she spoke to Ross's wife, Jessie. I'm going to go with Ross because Ross is eventually the one that gets the information. Mary explained what she had observed, that the house was quiet, no one was answering the door, and the chores had not been done. She asked Ross if he knew where the family might be. He did not. As far as he knew, Joe and Sarah should have been home. Nothing had happened that would explain their absence. And this began to worry him, too. So Ross began making his own inquiries. He contacted Joe's implement business, spoke with employee Ed Selly. Selly was worried as well, as he had not heard from Joe that morning. So to eliminate the most obvious possibility, Selly checked with Joe's parents. Perhaps there had been a family emergency after all. There wasn't. Joe's parents, who lived south of Villisca, knew nothing. No emergency had occurred. No message had been sent. No one had seen the family since the previous evening. With each answer, the mystery deepened. So Selly decided to drive to the Moore residence himself. And when he arrived, he found Mary Peckham waiting outside. And together they discussed the situation. Neither could explain the family's absence, yet even then, neither immediately entered the home. At the time, that is speculation, at the time, they were dealing with uncertainty, not evidence. People did not assume mass murder. They assumed illness, travel, or miscommunication, some ordinary explanation that had not yet revealed itself. And while waiting for additional family members to arrive, Selly attended to practical matters. He fed the horses and arranged for someone to milk the cows later that morning. And as the morning continued, concern spread through a widening circle of relatives, neighbors, and acquaintances. And people began to ask questions, and rumors began to spread. Has anyone seen Joe? Had anyone spoken with Sarah? Did anyone know where the family had gone? And by now, Ross Moore was making his way toward the house. Every unanswered question increased his anxiety. And when Ross Moore arrived around 8:20 a.m. at his brother's home, the situation immediately struck him as unusual based on the quietness. Ross walked around the property, taking in the same details that had concerned Mary Peckham, and nothing of the scene made sense. The shades were all shut. The family never pulled the shades. So making his way to the north side of the house, he attempted to look through one of the bedroom windows, but the curtains there prevented him from seeing inside. He knocked on the glass, shouted, called for Joe and Sarah, and there was still nothing. However, unlike the neighbors who were starting to gather, Ross possessed something they did not. He had a key. So Ross, Joe Moore's brother, went to the front door, unlocked it, and stepped inside. At first, nothing appeared obviously wrong. The house was quiet, but Ross would later describe the atmosphere as strange and unsettling. Sarah Moore was known as an exceptional housekeeper, and everything appeared almost too orderly. The parlor stood neat and undisturbed, with no signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no indication that violence had occurred. So he moved further into the house, and that's when he did notice something odd. A lady's skirt draped over the glass portion of the parlor door, and the downstairs bedroom door partially opened. So nervously, he walked up to the downstairs bedroom door, and he pushed it open wider. The bed was there, with the covers pulled up high, with what looked like two people lying underneath them, motionless. And that's when he also saw a large, very large pool of blood. Rather than move closer, Ross backed away from the room. He turned and hurried outside, where he told someone find City Marshal Hank Horton and to bring Dr. Cooper. In some reports, it was Mary who contacted authorities, while word spread rapidly through town. City Marshal John Henry Hank Horton was notified, along with others who would soon converge on the Moore residence. So his brother is the one to enter the house first.
Right.
And just because he has a key. Sorry, I had to get a drink real quick.
Well, and plus too, the fact that there's no noise and you have 4 young children there, no noise. No. I had 1 kid and the house was always noisy from 1. I can't imagine 4, especially 3 boys who are boys are rambunctious, so.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was always the rule at our house. If they got quiet, something's wrong.
That's right. Something's up. You need to go check.
Yeah.
If they're quiet, go check.
Yeah. Well, and this was, in my opinion, the moment that unfortunately ruined this investigation, was calling City Marshal Hank Horton. So when City Marshal Hank Horton entered the Moore residence, he had no way of knowing what he was about to find. Horton was not a homicide investigator. He was a peace officer. In 1912, Villisca had no criminal investigation division, no state police, no specialized crime scene unit waiting to take over. He was a small town marshal accustomed to handling disturbances, disputes, thefts, and the occasional drunk. There are many accounts about how Hank Horton moved through the scene, which I don't think is necessarily as important as what's discovered. I read arguments over he started upstairs, he started downstairs. That's wonderful. The point is he discovered. So I'm going to go with the most plausible one, where he starts in the downstairs bedroom, as this was the only room to have been witnessed by Ross Moore and where blood was discovered.
That makes sense. That would have been the first one he'd have gone to, because Ross would have said, hey, bring the law. The law gets there. And it says, I've seen something that looks like blood in the downstairs bedroom. Go to it. That makes sense. That would have been the first place they went.
Yeah. So the downstairs bedroom door remained open where Ross Moore had left it. Horton stepped inside, where a kerosene lamp, still lit, was sitting on the floor, its chimney missing, at the foot of the bed. As a small flame flickered, he approached the bed and pulled back part of the bedding. 2 bodies lay underneath. One of them was unmoved, while the other, the older of the 2, had her arm outflung as if to ward off a blow, and this arm was slashed. Their faces were bludgeoned beyond recognition. As Horton examined the room, sorry, that got me. Wow.
Yeah.
As Horton examined the room, additional details began to emerge. He noticed a small cloth wrap package about 4 by 6 inches, half under the bed. Inside was a portion of bacon slab. So he rewrapped it, replaced it under the bed. 2 dresses had been flung in a chair near the closet, and he carefully picked those up. Underneath were 2 Bibles, one inscribed to Lena Stillinger and the other to Ina Stillinger. So he replaced the dresses and noticed the windows were locked and that the room was hot and stuffy. In hearing Dr. Cooper, he turned to find him standing in the doorway, and he told him to go upstairs. But when he turned to leave, he noticed something he hadn't noticed when he first walked in. An axe leaned up against the wall near the bed. The entire length was covered in blood and had strands of hair on it. Nothing about this scene felt rushed. The room suggested that whoever had committed the murders had spent time inside the house after the killings were complete. Leaving the downstairs bedroom, Horton turned toward the narrow staircase leading to the 2nd floor. As he slowly, just everything described him moving super slow. I think this man was super nervous. about what he was stumbling into. He slowly moves up these narrow stairs, which is a very narrow staircase. In the upstairs bedroom lay Joe and Sarah Moore, with the covers undisturbed and pieces of cloth covering their faces. When the cloths were removed, the full extent of the damage was seen. The two had been brutally hacked beyond recognition. So perhaps needing air, some say he threw up. Horton tried to open the window, but it too was locked. He also noted a lit kerosene lamp on the floor near the foot of the bed, with its chimney missing. Moving into the children's room, Horton found the remaining victims: Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul. All under equally horrifying, undisturbed covers with equally horrifying cloths over their faces, masking gaping wounds. In this room, too, the windows were locked, but there was no kerosene lamp to light the murderer's way. Yet beyond the brutality itself, investigators found something else that made the scene particularly unsettling. The house appeared staged. Window shades throughout the home had been pulled down. Where shades were absent, pieces of clothing and fabric had been used to block the glass. This clothing was from the victims themselves, just pieces that he had found, or the murderer, I'll say, had found laying around the room. Mirrors had been covered, and portions of doors containing glass panels had also been concealed. Additional clues only deepened the mystery. Besides the skirt hung over the door in the parlor, Horton found the parlor undisturbed. As he went into the kitchen, he found bloody fingerprints on a pull-down shade. On the kitchen table, he saw a basin filled with reddened water, where the murderer had washed his hands, obviously, and next to that found the slab of bacon from which the portion of the guest's bedroom had been taken. There was also a smoky smell in the room, and after checking the stove, they found half-charred legal papers, mostly deeds. Hank and Dr. Cooper left the house together. Horton locked the door and told several neighbors to guard the home. Hank Horton called Montgomery County Sheriff Owen Jackson and the county coroner, Dr. Lindquist. And as word spread through Villisca, people began arriving at the Moore residence in growing numbers. Neighbors, friends, relatives, local officials, doctors, ministers, and curious townspeople all converged on the house. Before the day was over, one of the most important crime scenes in American history would be contaminated beyond repair. Because, well, not only that's the thing, is that Horton's going through, he's picked up dresses, he's moved bedding.
He's touched everything.
Yeah. Already just himself. And there was no description that I could find exactly of what Dr. Cooper had done at that point. Just know that Dr. Cooper was there. But you have a doctor, so obviously he's going to be checking.
He's going to be checking the people and touching them and, seeing if they're still alive, if he can help in any way.
Yeah.
It's like freaking amateur hour here. Like, I don't get why a police officer goes in, instantly recognizes it's a murder scene. One, you don't touch nothing. Instantly, you don't touch nothing. You got to get more people there so you can document everything.
Yeah.
I mean, even at this time period, that is standard procedure.
It's true.
This is also town sheriff.
Yeah. Well, no. Hank Horton is a city marshal. He's basically he's the peace officer basically of the town. So I'll give him a benefit of a doubt on that, because he may not be trained well enough like a sheriff may be, or an actual. He's city marshal though. I don't know. It is small town, and I don't know if there was enough training for him at that point. All he had really done is handle disturbances and the local drunk, and thefts and disputes and stuff like that. So he had never run across something like this. So I will give him the benefit of the doubt, but it does suck for this investigation.
You said something I didn't remember. I didn't remember that there were two separate kerosene lamps burning. I wonder if that was in some way an attempt to let the house burn down.
I did not know that either. And I found that in an older, came out in 1940. Crap, I can't remember the exact year. I want to say 48. It was an article written by a man who had done extensive research into the Villisca Axe Murder House, because he was attempting to try to shed light on something that may have been missed or something like that. And I found that written in his article that he had written for a journal, I believe, of some sorts. I
And
can't
there
remember the
was
exact name of
no
the tunnel either.
there was no electricity in the house, right? There was a wood
Not
burning stove.
What
to
year was this?
this was in 1912.
They would have had electricity,
They
or
would
they
have
would have
had
access to it.
electricity. Yeah.
So
would
if
have
there
had
was
access.
electricity, and even if he pulled down all the shades, there would have been no need for kerosene lamps.
Right.
Because
If
everyone
the
would have
house
known
had it.
if the house had it, but everyone would have known that the family would have been home. So there would have been no reason to conceal the light in the home. So that two open burning flames of a kerosene lamp without the hurricane globes on the top of them to
Mhm.
protect them if they fell over, protect them from catching something on fire. That's interesting. So
Yeah.
I did not know, I guess I did not know that part of the story.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, by mid-morning, news of the murders had spread far beyond East 2nd Street. The problem was that nobody truly knew how to manage a crime scene of this magnitude. City Marshal Hank Horton and Sheriff Owen Jackson were capable lawmen by the standards of their day, but neither had experience investigating a mass murder. As the crowd outside continued to grow, with some accounts placing 400 vehicles at the scene, Sheriff Jackson attempted to maintain order by calling in Company F of the Iowa National Guard, but the damage was already done. By modern standards, it was a disaster. No one knows exactly how many people entered the residence that morning. Some estimates place the number between 50 and 100 individuals. Many walked through multiple rooms. Others handled objects, moved belongings, opened doors, touched furniture, and disturbed areas that investigators had yet to examine. Even after members of the Iowa National Guard arrived and ropes were placed around the property, confusion remained regarding who should and should not be allowed inside. Today, investigators rely heavily on fingerprints, DNA, blood splatter analysis, trace evidence, and strict crime scene preservation. In Villisca, virtually none of those protections existed. Whatever clues the killer may have left behind were mixed with the footprints, fingerprints, and movements of dozens of innocent people, some of which were even allowed to handle the murder weapon itself. Even in his initial pass-through, Dr. Lindquist failed to take notes on the condition of the bodies. What was noted in the investigation that each of the victims were struck. Sorry, this is where it's going to get rough. What was noted in the investigation is that each of the victims were struck roughly 20 to 30 times each. Every victim was bludgeoned with the blunt end of the axe, except Joe, who received the most vicious of the strikes with the sharp end of the axe, causing his eyes to be missing from his skull. Gouge marks in the ceiling of the bedrooms were also noted. Some not near the bed, suggesting that the axeman was actually swinging the axe triumphantly after each kill. The axe was found to belong to Joe Moore, which was found in the bedroom with the Stillinger girls. The pillows on the bed were all soaked with blood, and brain matter, which had congealed and clots were noticeable, indicated that they had been killed sometime shortly after midnight. The only body that showed defensive wounds was that of Lena Stillinger. Sorry. Her nightgown had been pushed up and her underwear removed, with her body being posed in a sexual manner. This led to suspicion of sexual assault, but that has never been determined without a doubt. Up in the attic, 2 cigarette butts were also retrieved, which is why investigators believed the murderer hid and waited to ambush the family. Finally, around 10 p.m. to midnight, accounts differ, the bodies were moved to the fire station down the road and removed from the scene. It's impossible to know how much evidence was lost that first day, but what is certain is that investigators were forced to begin their search for a killer with a crime scene that had already been compromised. I apologize. I got to get something to drink.
Yeah. So, having been to that house, you would have to have sat completely still in that attic.
Yeah.
If there was someone hiding in the attic. However, I know when we went, there is also a basement with basement doors or cellar. I guess it would have been a cellar. That open up, and on the lip of that cellar, you can actually reach the lowest window of the house and could have climbed in. But we don't know if anybody checked it. And that might have been how they initially got in. But it's 1912.
Right.
They probably didn't lock their doors. So.
But they said the door was locked when everybody arrived. So. The
They had to
doors
have
were
gotten out
locked.
somewhere. Well, they could have gone out a window, because that
I
window,
mean,
I know that we went into investigation mode on true crime investigation. We were actually looking, and I was like,
Yeah.
could I get out this window? Yes, I could, because the lip of that cellar door entrance was just high enough that you could step out and pretty much go unimpeded around the edge of that cellar door on the lawn and onto the street and be gone.
Yeah. Yeah. Very easily, too. So, well, in the days following the murders, Villisca became the center of national attention. Newspapers across Iowa and eventually across the country began reporting on the case, and reporters descended upon the town. Speculation spread rapidly, and every new rumor seemed to generate 3 more. Escaped lunatics from the state sane asylum, a roving band of transients, or, my favorite, a religious cult out of Denver requiring blood sacrifices. Newspapers repeatedly got things wrong. Joe's name was presented as Joseph, not Josiah. The Stillinger girls were the Spillinger or Stillings girls. While reporters fought to outdo one another, the victims were laid to rest on Thursday, June 13th, 1912, with 7,000 people flocking to Villisca. The town's only 2 hearses carried the adults, while separate carriages carried the children. While the funeral took place, the bloody bedding was stripped from the beds, taken from the house, and burned, while the house was fumigated. Authorities immediately began interviewing anyone who might have information. One clue would quickly garner an arrest. Investigators interviewed Faye Van Gilder, the 16-year-old niece to Joe and Sarah Moore. She spoke of a man who accosted her, inquiring about the location of the Moore home the Saturday morning prior to the murders. When she later told Sarah Moore about this, Sarah stated that a man fitting the description was seen hanging around their house. And this led to the arrest of Joe Ricks on June 15, 1912, when he stepped off a train wearing bloody shoes. However, when Faye Van Gilder went to identify the man, Joe Ricks didn't fit the description, and his explanation for the bloody shoes were that he traded them with a fellow transient. This was more than likely the beginning of the, quote, train riding transient theory that investigators and researchers into this case have held onto for so long. Another transient, S.A., quotes, Andy Sawyer, was arrested on June 18, 1912. However, there was never any real evidence linking him to the crime, and it was proven by a sheriff that he was in Osceola, Iowa, the night of the murders. Iowa, the night of the murders, as he was arrested for vagrancy that night. A handful of others would be arrested, eventually released between June and December of 1912. Sam Moyer, Joe Moore's brother-in-law, would be arrested on June 11th for rumor that he stated he wanted to kill Joe Moore over the treatment of his sister. John Boland was arrested June 20th on suspicion of a signed letter confessing to the murders. Frank Roberts on July 5th, Lou Van Alstyne on December 28th, all of whom had alibis or were not in town the night of the murders. These leads, along with reporters, some of who wrote that a photograph had been obtained from the retina of Lena Stillinger, were nothing more than a wild goose chase. The arrival of additional investigators created additional problems where information was not always shared effectively. And to make matters worse, many of these so-called experts brought in to assist often disagreed with one another. Early 20th century criminal investigation was still evolving, and competing schools of thought argued over everything from criminal profiling to identification methods. Detectives, criminologists, bloodhound handlers, and even local fortune tellers were consulted as authorities searched desperately for answers. This would eventually cause the Axe murders to lose its status as, quote, good copy, and the headlines would fade from the front page for 2 years. Even a reward of $2,000, roughly $65,000 today, failed to rekindle it. But it wasn't until 1914, when a Kansas City detective got involved, that the case would garner indictments, investigations, and courtroom battles. So in 1914, the investigation entered a new chapter. That year, the Burns National Detective Agency assigned Detective J.N. Wilkerson to the case. Wilkerson, his last name I stumble over, Wilkerson was ambitious, persistent, and determined to solve one of Iowa's most notorious unsolved crimes. He quickly immersed himself in the investigation and became convinced that authorities had been looking in the wrong places. While others continued searching for drifters, transients, and local suspects, Wilkerson developed a theory that would eventually consume years of his life and divide the town of Villisca. The first name that drew his attention was William Blackie Mansfield. See, Mansfield was a packing house worker who had lived and worked in several communities throughout the Midwest. It was Mansfield's alleged violent history that attracted Wilkerson to him, and Wilkerson became convinced Mansfield was responsible for the murders. July 5th, 1914, William Mansfield's wife, child, father-in-law, and mother-in-law were all brutally bludgeoned in the same manner while they slept. Mansfield is also linked to similar murders in Colorado Springs, Colorado, Ellsworth, Kansas, Paola, Kansas, which was just 4 days prior to Villisca, and 2 axe murders in Illinois, all of which share striking MOs to Villisca, in which multiple people were killed as they slept with the blunt end of an axe. The axe was left at the scene, the murderer stayed and washed up at the scene, and a kerosene lamp was found missing its chimney. So Wilkerson began assembling a case against him and pushed for the matter to be presented before a grand jury. The grand jury investigated the allegations, but ultimately refused to indict Mansfield. He was able to provide an alibi through employment records, which placed him hundreds of miles away in Illinois at the time of the Villisca murders. For investigators, that might have marked the end of the theory. But for Wilkerson, it was only the beginning. He was angered by the decision, and he publicly suggested that Mansfield had escaped indictment because influential people were protecting him. And then he made a far more explosive accusation. According to Wilkerson, Mansfield had not acted alone. He claimed that Mansfield had been hired, and that the man who allegedly hired him was one of the most powerful citizens in Villisca, Frank Fernando Jones. And the accusation sent shockwaves through the community. Frank Jones was already a familiar figure to anyone following the case. His business rivalry and prior relationship with Joe Moore were well known, and his prominence in Villisca made Wilkerson's allegations impossible to ignore. Wilkerson argued that Jones had motive. Years earlier, Joe Moore had worked for Jones in the implement business as his top salesman. Eventually, Moore left and opened a competing dealership across the street, allegedly taking the biggest client Frank Jones had, John Deere. Wilkerson became convinced that resentment over that rivalry had festered for years, and according to his theory, Jones wanted Moore removed as a competitor and hired Mansfield to carry out the killing. And the theory immediately attracted attention because it offered something the investigation long lacked: a clear narrative. Instead of an unknown killer slipping into town unnoticed, there was now an alleged motive, an alleged mastermind, and an alleged hired killer. To many people, it felt like the first explanation that tied the pieces together. And Wilkerson threw himself into promoting that theory. He held public meetings, gave interviews, raised money to continue his investigation. And at these gatherings, he portrayed Jones as the architect of the crime and Mansfield as the man who carried it out. Crowds attended, newspapers covered the controversy extensively, and supporters viewed Wilkerson as a crusader, exposing corruption and influence, and critics viewed him as a man who had become obsessed with a theory he could not prove. But the battle soon moved beyond public opinion. Frank Jones responded by filing a $60,000 slander lawsuit against Wilkerson for publicly linking his name to the murders. Granted, that's a shit ton of money back then.
Yeah.
Because $2,000 is $65,000 in today's money. Now we're at $60,000 back then in 1914.
Wow.
This case drew considerable attention, but the court ultimately returned a verdict in Wilkerson's favor. Rather than ending the dispute, the outcome only emboldened him more. Wilkerson continued to spew his narrative of Frank Jones's involvement. The controversy grew so large that Iowa Attorney General H.M. Havner assumed control over the investigation. Once again, evidence was presented, and once again, a grand jury reviewed the allegations, and no indictment was returned against Frank Jones. And Wilkerson still refused to back down. Rather than accepting the outcome, he accused officials of protecting Jones and interfering with the investigation. He publicly criticized the Attorney General and continued insisting that a conspiracy existed. For nearly 3 years, he pursued the theory with relentless determination. Yet despite all of the accusations, public meetings, investigations, and courtroom battles, the same problem remained. No witness placed Mansfield inside the Moore home. No physical evidence connected Mansfield to the murders, and no document proved that Jones had ever hired him. There was no financial record showing money changing hands, and no confession ever emerged. The theory rested largely upon motive, suspicion, and Wilkerson's belief that he had uncovered the truth. But that does not mean that the theory should be dismissed outright. Wilkerson devoted years of his life to pursuing it, and many people at the time found his arguments persuasive. Even today, some researchers believe he may have been closer to the truth than history has ever given him credit for. In the process, though, Frank Jones's career and reputation was ruined, effectively ending his political run. And in 1918, after years of investigation, multiple grand jury's proceedings, and intense public scrutiny, neither Frank Jones nor William Mansfield was ever indicted for the Villisca murders. Just as Wilkerson's campaign against Jones appeared to have reached a dead end, investigators were turning their attention toward another suspect, one whose behavior would eventually make him the most controversial figure in the entire Villisca case. That's back to Squirrely Man, as y'all said it, Reverend George Kelly. Mr. Squirrely Man here.
Yeah, he's Weasley.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the one who spent the night alone in the room while the pastor and his wife slept outside in a tent. Alone? Prove it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that puts a hole in his alibi real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Well, just as J.N. Wilkerson's campaign against Frank Jones appeared to have reached a dead end, the investigation took its dramatic turn. The new suspect could not have been more different from Frank Jones. He was not wealthy. He was not politically connected. He was not one of the most influential men. He was simply George Kelly. Kelly was an unusual figure, though, even before investigators began connecting him to the murders. He was born in England. He immigrated to the United States in 1905, married an American woman, and attended a theological seminary in Omaha. Although he never graduated and was never formally ordained in the United States, he nevertheless served congregations throughout Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, and Illinois. Many who heard him preach remembered him as an effective speaker with a strong voice and compelling sermons. Yet there was another side to Kelly. Over time, reports began to emerge. This is going to be like after the murders. To emerge, describing increasingly strange behavior. While eccentricity was often tolerated in the early 20th century, some members of the communities where Kelly served found his actions troubling. In Sutton, Nebraska, residents reported that Kelly had developed a habit of hiding behind trees and startling passerbys. According to multiple accounts, he would suddenly leap out and shout, "They're after me! They think I've killed them at Villisca!" The incidents alarmed local residents enough that complaints were made to authorities. By the time officials attempted to locate him, however, Kelly had already moved on. Meanwhile, the Villisca investigation remained stalled. Rumors circulated throughout Iowa during the summer of 1917 that a grand jury had secretly returned an indictment in the Villisca case. Officials refused to comment publicly, fueling even more speculation. Public pressure continued to mount. Many people wanted an arrest, and others wanted the case closed once and for all. Then, in a surprising development, Kelly surfaced in Red Oak, community near Villisca, and surrendered himself. Only after did the public learn that a grand jury had, in fact, indicted him for the Villisca murders. The news stunned many observers. For years, Wilkerson had insisted that Frank Jones and William Mansfield were responsible. Now authorities were moving in an entirely different direction, and Wilkerson was furious. Convinced that investigators were abandoning the true solution to the case, he publicly attacked the Attorney General and those overseeing the prosecution. He continued insisting that Kelly was merely a distraction and that Jones remained the true mastermind behind the murders. At one point, Wilkerson even rented Omaha's Boyd Theater and delivered a lengthy public presentation condemning the state's handling of the case. According to Wilkerson, Kelly was an innocent dupe, while Jones remained protected by powerful friends and political influence. State officials disagreed, and their focus had shifted squarely onto Kelly. And then, on August 31st, 1917, more than 5 years after the murders, George Kelly made a confession. According to Kelly, he had attended the Children's Day program in Villisca and later returned to the Ewing residence, where he was staying. Reverend Ewing and his wife eventually retired for the evening, leaving Kelly alone in the house. He claimed he tried to sleep, but he could not. According to Kelly, a strange sensation began to overwhelm him. He described hearing a whirring sound in his head and feeling increasingly ill. Hoping fresh air might help, he left the house and began walking through town. Kelly later claimed he found himself near the Presbyterian Church while contemplating a sermon he was preparing entitled Slay Utterly. It was then, he said, that he heard a voice. The voice told him to, quote, go on. Kelly claimed he did not understand what was happening, but believed he was being directed by God. He said he began following a shadow through the darkness until it led him to a house he did not recognize. Standing outside, he claimed the voice instructed him to kill. Kelly later recalled responding, quote, yes, Lord, I will. According to his confession, he found an axe behind the house and picked it up. He then approached the front door and simply entered. Once inside, he claimed the voice instructed him again. Quote, go in, do as I tell you, slay utterly. Kelly said he moved through the house as though in a trance. As he climbed the stairs, he believed he was ascending Jacob's ladder from the Bible. Inside one of the upstairs bedrooms, he saw children sleeping. According to Kelly, it was then the voice said to him, quote, suffer the little children to come unto me. His response was chilling. He simply said, they are coming, my Lord. Kelly later stated that he began, quote, sending those children somewhere. He then moved into the parents' bedroom and repeated the process. According to his confession, he eventually grew tired and went downstairs where he discovered the Stillinger girls sleeping in the guest bedroom. The voice allegedly told him, quote, more work yet. Kelly claimed he continued the killings before finally laying down the axe and leaving the house. Afterward, he said he simply returned to the Ewing residence, went back to bed, slept until morning. The next day, he boarded a train and left Villisca at 5:19 a.m., returning to his home in Macedonia, Nebraska by 7:30 a.m. For investigators desperate to solve the case, the confession appeared extraordinary, yet almost immediately questions emerged. Some portions seemed to fit known facts. Others sounded bizarre, dreamlike, and detached from reality. Was Kelly describing an actual crime, a religious delusion, or something else entirely? And the debate would not last long. Only days later, after consulting with attorneys, Kelly completely repudiated the confession. He now denied responsibility for the murders. Supporters of the confession argued that Kelly possessed knowledge only the killer could have known. They pointed to his presence in Villisca, his unusual behavior after the murders, and his years of fascination with the case. To them, the confession represented the final piece of the puzzle that investigators had been assembling for years. Critics, however, saw something entirely different. Those skeptical of the confession noted Kelly's history of emotional instability and questioned whether he was capable of providing a reliable account of events. Some believed he was highly suggestible and vulnerable to pressure during interrogations, and others pointed out that by 1917, details of the murders had circulated through newspapers, conversations, and investigative reports for years. Information that once might have been known only to the killer was no longer necessarily secret. The confession that seemed poised to solve one of America's most infamous unsolved crimes had suddenly become the center of a new controversy. And that controversy would soon be tested in court. Yeah, this is probably in my opinion, the one of the most highly debated moments about this case, is because he says it, gets attorneys, recants, says I'm not responsible anymore. But he goes and willingly gives himself up. I'm not going to get too much into it because then we got discussion coming up. But anyways, go ahead, Shelley.
And here's the thing. In what you're saying, he said he does not mention the condition of Lena.
Yeah.
And he does not mention the bacon. If he is having this much of a, let's call it his hallucination. Let's call it his mental state. If it is that influenced by, let's call it God, because that's what he's saying. He's getting messages from God, the voices. I think he'd remember that part.
I would agree. Well, George Kelly's first trial began on Tuesday, September 4th, 1917 at 10:10 in the morning. When Kelly entered the courtroom, he was reportedly smiling broadly, with his wife following behind him. And almost immediately, the question of his confession became central. Attorney General H.M. Havner asked to introduce new evidence supporting the state's claim that no, quote, third-degree methods had been used to force Kelly's confession, while Kelly's attorneys argued the opposite. Kelly, still smiling, entered a plea of not guilty, and from the beginning, the trial became less about whether Kelly had confessed and more about whether that confession could be trusted. Jury selection was slow and difficult. The case had been discussed for years, and many potential jurors had already formed opinions. Jurors were questioned for days, not only about their opinions on Kelly, but also about whether they belonged to J.N. Wilkerson's Iowa Protective Association, an organization formed largely around the idea that Kelly was being used to protect Frank Jones. Wilkerson remained a visible force during the proceedings, still clinging to his theory that Jones, not Kelly, was the real answer to Villisca. The trial itself quickly became strange and chaotic. At one point, Attorney General Havner was briefly arrested on a charge related to interfering with the grand jury investigation, posted a $1,000 bond, and then continued prosecuting the case. Wilkerson was reprimanded after showing jurors a newspaper photograph of Kelly in a friendly pose with a relative of one of the victims. The case was a spectacle, to say the least. When testimony began, the prosecution focused heavily on Kelly's behavior before and after the murders. Several witnesses testified that Kelly had spoken excitedly about the crime before the details were commonly known, including to individuals on a train ride out of Villisca the morning he left, stating, quote, 8 souls are dead back there in Villisca. This was one of the prosecution's key points, that Kelly appeared to know things before the public should have known them. Mrs. Miller, a waitress from Macedonia, it was Iowa earlier, I should have said Macedonia, Iowa. A witness from Macedonia, Iowa, testified that Kelly had told her one of the Stillinger girls had, quote, roused up and caused the murderer trouble while he was trying to kill her. A jailer from Sioux Falls testified that Kelly had confessed while imprisoned there in 1914 or 1915, allegedly saying, quote, I killed those people in Villisca, Iowa, the Moores and the Stillinger girls. Prosecutors also brought up the strange piece of bacon found near the foot of the bed in the room where the Stillinger girls were killed. Kelly had been in jail before, and witnesses described one of his peculiar habits was sneaking small pieces of food from his plate, wrapping them up, and hiding them on his person. The prosecution also presented testimony about bloody clothing. Miss Marquard, a laundry maker in Council's Bluffs, testified that a shirt was sent to the laundry with instructions that it be returned in the Macedonia basket, and it was covered with blood. The laundry agent then testified that Kelly later told him some of his laundry had not come back from Council's Bluff. And this testimony mattered because the timing placed the incident in June of 1912, shortly after the Villisca murders. Sorry, I know I fumbled through that paragraph. Basically, he sends a bloody shirt to the laundry lady, Miss Marquard, in Macedonia, Iowa. And that was in June of 1912. I fumbled over a lot of that. I apologize.
That's okay.
The physical evidence from the house was also brought into court. Attorney General Havner carried the axe past Kelly, and Kelly shifted position but reportedly showed no clear emotion. Dr. Lindquist, the coroner, identified it as the axe found standing against the wall in the room occupied by the Stillinger girls. Marshal Hank Horton testified that the axe appeared to have been wiped down, noting lint clinging to it, and described it as covered in blood and brain matter from handle to head. The small Bibles found with Lena and Ina Stillinger were also introduced. And when the story of their identification was recounted, Miss Stillinger was visibly emotional. Other witnesses added to the damaging picture. Beulah Calloway, a telephone operator, also testified that Kelly's disturbing behavior toward her, saying that around Christmas in 1912, he asked her to pose nude for him so he could paint her picture. According to her testimony, Kelly argued that the Bible contained pictures of nude women and there would be no harm in her posing that way. Well, the defense tried to pull the case in a different direction. Instead of arguing that Kelly was ordinary or stable, they emphasized his mental condition. Witnesses testified that Kelly had spoken of being insane, that he had been confined in a federal hospital for the insane in Washington, D.C., and that he had previously sent improper letters to a young girl. Miss Ewing, the minister's wife, testified for the defense that Kelly's bed at the parsonage had been slept in and that there were no visible bloodstains, or blood at all for that matter. A court reporter testified that Kelly told Havner he had committed the crime because he was insane and had been insane since childhood. The defense used this testimony to argue that Kelly's confession was the product of mental illness and pressure, not reliable guilt. The insanity argument became one of the central pieces of the defense. Several witnesses testified about Kelly's bizarre religious statements, including one of which he allegedly said, quote, "If God wants me to burn a barn, I must do it. And if he wants me to slay utterly, I have to do that too." Dr. Fitzsimmons, who had observed Kelly at a point in time, testified that while Kelly was in his custody, he had frothed at the mouth and had acted paranoid. Other testimony described Kelly asking girls in Winter, South Dakota, to pose nude for photographs. And an official from the Sioux Falls jail stated that Kelly once became convinced he was President Woodrow Wilson. The defense's goal was to show that Kelly was deeply unstable and that his confession could not be trusted. The prosecution worked to counter that by stressing 4 major points. First, Kelly had allegedly told people about the crime before it was generally known. Second, he appeared to know details only the killer should have known. Third, he had allegedly confessed while jailed in Sioux Falls. And fourth, he had made a sworn confession in 1917. The defense argued that the state had built its case around a broken and unstable man. They repeated Wilkerson's claim that Attorney General Havner was using Kelly as a scapegoat while ignoring the Frank Jones theory. Kelly himself did not take the stand. When the case finally went to the jury, jurors were given several possible verdicts, including first-degree murder, second-degree murder, manslaughter, not guilty, or not guilty by reason of insanity. On September 28th, after 21 days of trial, the jury was discharged because it could not reach a verdict. They had taken 22 ballots, and every vote came out the same. 11 jurors favored acquittal, while 1 juror held out for not guilty by reason of insanity. So that was his first trial that went before a jury. 21 days of trial. They could not reach. They were basically
they were deadlocked, yeah.
Yeah, deadlocked, hung jury. So a second trial began later that year on November 24th, 1917. By then, Havner was still prosecuting under the shadow of his own indictment, and the case had already exhausted many of those involved. So 2 days later, on November 26th, the jury retired at 4:15 in the afternoon and returned about 4 hours later with a verdict of not guilty. Kelly reportedly beamed and said, "Fine, fine." With that verdict, the only man to ever be tried for the Villisca Axe murders walked away. Havner moved on in politics. Frank Jones remained in Villisca with his reputation permanently damaged. Wilkerson finally faded from the case, and Kelly largely disappeared from public view. Even the official trial records were later said to have vanished. After years of accusation, confession, testimony, and courtroom spectacle, the murders of Joe and Sarah Moore, their 4 children, and Lena and Ina Stillinger still remained unsolved. So they went through all of this stuff of this trial with this man. He's the only man to ever stand trial for the Villisca murders, and he walks away. I'm going to wait for discussion to give my opinion on it. We only have a couple of more theories to go through here, and they're rather short. And then we'll get to what we think actually happened and talk about our paranormal evidence. Another theory that emerged years later focused on Henry Lee Moore, a man with no known connection to Villisca or the Moore family, despite sharing their surname. I do not have a picture of him. Sorry. Interest in Moore stemmed from his arrest in December of 1912 for the axe murders of his mother and grandmother in Missouri. Because those killings shared some similarities with the Villisca murders, investigators and journalists began speculating that Moore might have been responsible for a series of unsolved axe murders across the Midwest. The theory suggested that Villisca victims were not targeted for any personal reason, but were instead the victims of a traveling killer. While the idea is intriguing, there is no evidence placing Henry Lee Moore in Villisca on the night of the murders. No witnesses identified him, no physical evidence connected him to the crime scene, and no relation between Moore and the victims has ever been established. As a result, the case against Henry Lee Moore rests almost entirely on similarities between crimes rather than direct evidence. Although he remains a noteworthy figure in discussions of this case, most historians view him as a less likely suspect than figures such as Frank Jones, William Mansfield, or George Kelly. But more than a century later, he remains an interesting possibility, but little more than that. But in recent years, another theory has emerged. In 2017, authors Bill James and Rachel McCarthy James argued that Villisca may have been one of the many murders committed by a traveling serial killer they identified as Paul Mueller. Their book, The Man from the Train, connected Villisca to a larger pattern of axe murders occurring near railroad lines throughout the United States. While the theory has attracted significant interest among modern researchers, it remains speculative and was never part of the original investigation. Like many Villisca theories, it offers intriguing possibilities, but stops short of definitive proof. More than a century has passed since the morning Mary Peckham noticed something was wrong next door. The houses, businesses, and streets of Villisca have changed over the years, but the questions raised on June 10th, 1912 remain remarkably similar to those being asked today. Who entered the Moore home that night? Why were 8 innocent people murdered? And how did the person responsible disappear without ever being definitively identified? Throughout the years, investigators, historians, journalists, and amateur researchers have attempted to answer those questions. Some have focused on Henry Lee Moore and the possibility that the murders were part of a larger pattern of axe killings across the Midwest. Others have pointed to William Mansfield and the theory that the crime was a contract killing carried out on behalf of someone else. Many have looked toward Frank Jones, questioning whether a business rivalry and alleged personal animosity could have provided a motive for one of the most brutal crimes in Iowa history. Each theory offers possible answers and explains certain aspects of the case, yet every theory ultimately leaves important questions unresolved. Of all the suspects, George Kelly remains the figure most researchers continue to return to. He was present in Villisca on the night of the murders. His behavior attracted suspicion, and his statements raised concerns. He confessed, recanted, and stood trial. Yet, even with all of those factors working against him, a jury could not conclude beyond a reasonable doubt that he was guilty. And that reality speaks to the central challenge of the Villisca case. The evidence is incomplete. The crime scene was compromised, witnesses' memories changed over time, and rumors often spread faster than facts. With every passing year, certainty became more difficult to achieve, and perhaps that is why the case continues to endure. The Villisca Axe murders exist at the intersection of history, mystery, and tragedy. There are enough facts to build compelling theories, but not enough facts to prove any one of them conclusively. Every generation examines the evidence and reaches its own conclusions. Some leave convinced that George Kelly was the killer, while others still lie with Frank Jones, William Mansfield, or another suspect entirely. Still others believe the truth may never be known. Yet amid all the theories, accusations, and debates, it's important to remember what lies at the center of this story. It was not originally a mystery. It was a family. Joe and Sarah Moore were parents raising 4 children in a small Iowa town. Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul had their entire lives ahead of them. Lena and Ina Stillinger simply attended a church program with friends and accepted an invitation to spend the night. These are the lives and people lost to the horrific nature and mystery of this case. More than 100 years later, the mystery remains unsolved, but the victims should not be forgotten. While the identity of the killer continues to be debated, the lives that were lost deserve to be remembered. In many ways, that may be the most important lesson Villisca still has to offer. The search for the truth continues, but so does the responsibility to remember the 8 people whose story began it all. Sorry, something about getting to them children and the Villisca, the Stillinger girls gets me.
All the children.
All the children, yeah.
All the children.
It's kind of brutal. So what do y'all think? You've heard, I could have gone on for another couple of hours with this case, but I gave it to you as best summed up as I could.
What say you, Mr. Chad Wandell?
So there's a lot that doesn't sit right in this from just, I'm putting my brain in evil man mode here, okay?
Okay.
And one of the things that really stands out to me is you said there was wild swings, like the axe had hit the ceiling and the wall. And to me, if you've ever seen somebody that's not strong enough to yield the axe, that's indicative of it. Because they throw that axe back trying to get the momentum, but they take the momentum too far the other way and then come back. But the real thing that really is weighing on me of like, what the F is, how does someone kill 8 people with an axe quietly enough no one is disturbed? Part of me thinks there may be something else at play here. And I'm thinking, chemically related.
I'm glad that you said that because that was a thought that I said. And almost every single article that I was able to find that researchers or somebody has looked into this case, almost all of them have said that there was no chemical smell, no chemical anything that they could find that was seen on the scene that could have been used in order to create some type of agent to render them unconscious or anything of that nature.
Yes, there is. You said
I'm sure
two
that
things.
no, I know. Like kerosene, I'm sure is one of them.
Yeah, but it's the burning of kerosene that creates an oxygen poor environment.
Yeah.
And one of the ways to accelerate that oxygen poor environment is to close your windows, pull
and
your
lock
drapes,
them.
and shut off. And so you got to think maybe they weren't sticking things over the window to block the view. They were sticking things over the window to block airflow.
That's a good point.
So, but then the other thing is if I'm evil douchebag politician who we can't trust to start off with, the way that this case was handled sounds exactly like how I would tell the people I own to handle it. When you get there, screw up the scene, walk through it, trample it, destroy evidence, get it out of here. Oh, by the way, there was this guy in town that was here for one day. It's a perfect fall guy. Now, the thing that screws that theory up to me is if I was the politician man and I've got my patsy on trial, his ass is getting found guilty. So for me, that's a big break in that theory, is like, because I'm going to make it happen. Like, I'm going to plant evidence. I'm going to plant stuff. If I owned the police department to do it anyway, I could have planted the evidence to make sure he was guilty. Like, steal his Bible, pull some hair, whatever, like find something that I could have tied him to that building completely and left it there as a plant. So for me, that kind of breaks that theory too. But I want to think, because to me, if somebody, because you got to think, if you hit somebody with a blunted side of the axe, it's going to make a god awful noise.
Oh God, yeah.
There's no way you hit anyone inside of a small house like that. And me in dad mode, I'm not shooting up immediately going, what the F was that?
Yeah.
Like, there's no way. So either they knew this person and this person had been invited in, or there has to have been some other agent involved that caused them to go to sleep or become unconscious. Maybe they were fed something, maybe they were given something, but there has to have been something that caused them to go to sleep to make the murder so easy.
That's actually a really good point of talking about the oxygen poor environment. Like a carbon monoxide, setting,
Exactly.
if you will. Because in everything that I read, a lot of people were looking for chemical agents such as like chloroform or something like that could have been used, and nothing was used or could be found on the scene that would reflect that. But to think of something like that, where it's like, hey, if I just deplete the oxygen in this house and I seal off all the excess that I possibly can,
they'll go to sleep.
They'll go to sleep, and then I can do whatever I want. Because there is a lot of talk in this case about the fact that they were killed, and then it's like the killer came back to do more damage to the bodies. That's what a lot of articles say, but there was conflicting arguments about that, and I didn't find anything within the original pieces most of the original pieces that I could find that stated that outright. So I didn't include it, but it would make for an excellent way for that. That sounds horrible to say an excellent way, but for that killer to be able to do that if they use some type of
plausible
oxygen. Yeah, it makes it plausible.
Gas,
So there, and in the comments, and I'm agreeing with Dana had put up a comment, and this was something that we discussed, that she thought that it was very possibly a woman. Now, if you think about it, no one was looking for a woman. I've told you how small that attic door was. And Mary, the next door neighbor, did have a daughter that was eventually institutionalized and just went away, and nobody was quite sure why. A woman could have easily gotten into that attic. It was partially cleaned up. She was the next door neighbor. Her mother probably had a key to the house. It wouldn't have been unusual to see her, the daughter, maybe
She didn't
coming and
know.
going.
I can say that she didn't.
She
have
didn't?
A key to,
Okay.
wait, to the Moore house?
Uh-huh.
No, they didn't have a key to the house
They
because
didn't have a key?
Mary went up and tried the door the morning that the
You're
bodies
right.
were discovered, and she couldn't get in.
Okay, but either way, we do know that you could have gotten in and out of that window. And if the door was not locked, she could have gone in, sat in that attic, could have sat very still. Also, the fact is that everyone was killed with the blunt end of an axe that was wielded wildly, except for the man who was hit with the sharp side so much that his eyes came out.
Yeah.
See, that is
that's
a
weird.
special kind of rage, and that is the kind of rage that is generally, let's face it, if a man is rageful at a female, and we see some serial killers, often worse things are done to a female in the group than instead of a man if they are one of those kind of killers. The man had the sharp side of the axe taken and used on his face. He was the most destroyed. Now, since there was no actual sexual assault that was proven of Lena, that could have very well been staged to make sure it looked like a man had been in the house. Also, the weapon left right where it was, where it could be easily found. That's suspect too. But things had also been cleaned up. Again, this looks like planted evidence to me. And a female would have definitely cleaned things up. And a female being in the house, maybe, I think, with as small as everything was, a lighter frame, a lighter figure moving throughout that house could have potentially been quieter. Because, Blake, you know, whenever you and some of the other people with us were going up and down those stairs, you could hear everything. Now, I tried going up those stairs very quietly. I only made a few small creaks because I stood next to the edge and I took very slow, very intentional steps.
Yeah,
And
but I want you to hit a
stairs-
watermelon with a hammer in one of those rooms and see who hears it.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, well, I will give you one thing on this woman theory that is very interesting because if we think about women killers, what do women use most? Poison. We have kerosene lamps, and the thing is that the kids' room did not have, and I'll explain this because we've been there. The kids' room didn't have a kerosene lamp in it, from what I was able to find. But if that house is so small, the fact that you put one kerosene lamp at the foot of the parents' bed, and you seal off all the windows upstairs, you could the upstairs alone is like a large bedroom.
Yeah, it's very small.
It's the kids' room and the parents' room, but it's like a modern day large bedroom, 15 by 15 for both rooms. It's not big. So you could get away possibly with sealing it up and doing only one kerosene lamp, which is maybe why. And then also the fact that it could have been left behind in hopes that it burned.
That it burned and it destroyed the evidence. Well, also
that's interesting though, because women are more prone to poison and doing things cleaner.
That's right.
And if they're all asleep, it makes it easier, and maybe possibly for a woman. I just don't know if do we think, and I'm not saying anything against the ladies, I'm thinking in 1912 here, how society was and women were perceived and women maintained themselves back then. Do we think a woman of 1912 is capable of producing and wielding? We're talking an axe.
Lizzie Borden.
We don't know if she did it though either. I mean, that's what I'm saying. I know that they were a weapon of convenience back then. Obviously everybody had one laying around to break up firewood, chop firewood, everything. Everybody had an axe back then. And then we're talking about like gun ownership wasn't as big back then. I think it's like 15 to 52% of households had guns back then, but they were mainly used for utilitarian purposes, for hunting and keeping away predators. So it wasn't anything like killing with a gun. Yes, it happened, but not, an axe was very common. 1912 was a very bloody year for axe murders at that point too.
Well, Chad did make the point that the axe was swung wildly, and a smaller female I can tell you, I have had to chop wood. I was extremely unsuccessful because the axe was heavier than I anticipated.
Right.
I damn near cut my leg off a couple of times because it was like coming down
Control.
had more momentum than
Yep.
I thought it would. So I can see that if it was, and again, we do know that the Mary's daughter was institutionalized, was known to have been a little off the rails, was known to have some mental issues. So I just think that Chad actually makes that point about could they have? Was it ever actually proven that that was actually the Morse family's axe? Because you're right, everybody had an axe.
Yeah.
Yes, it was proven in court.
That it was definitely their
testified
axe.
by multiple
So
people that it
was
was an
a-
axe that belonged to Joe Moore. Yes.
So that was a crime of opportunity where the murder weapon was opportunistic. It was whatever was right there.
Right.
Perhaps if it was a female, had gone in there not necessarily with the intention to kill them with an axe, but maybe there was something going on. And maybe it could have been she just wanted to burn the house down. But that wasn't happening because see, the deeds in the oven. I think if it was a man, they would have probably just taken the deeds with them. That would give them leverage. They would have information, that kind of thing. Someone that was just, why would you burn them all? That seems like something that you're tying me to something else. And someone who isn't thinking clearly might go, well, I'm just going to burn these. Perhaps in an attempt to bring more carbon monoxide or again to burn the house down with.
Right.
So again, I'm thinking it's very plausible and no one would have looked for a female because we ladies didn't do that. And blood on a female's clothing, if you were to see blood on a female's clothing, it could be explained away extremely easily. Could have been a menstrual cycle. Could have been that they were a nurse or a midwife and had helped deliver a baby. Could have been, oh my gosh, my kid, he cut his head open and I've been, whatever.
Yeah.
Blood on a female's clothing actually is much easier explained than blood on a man's clothing.
Yeah. So I will say I agree that I think that a woman could have committed the crime. I just wanted to see, I'm not saying that they couldn't have swung the axe. I just also know that there's different perspectives out there. And I wanted to kind of get your ideas on, if somebody is going to say, oh, well, your theory, women back then. No, I don't agree with that. I agree that a woman could go swing an axe wildly and bludgeon 8 people to death in their sleep, especially if they are asleep.
You know what? It just kind of hit me. It's like, a man using an axe, I think, instinctively uses the blade end.
Yeah.
Like if I grab an axe, I don't know that I would even ever take a swing with the blunt end unless I'm trying to hammer tap something in.
Right.
And you're not going to swing wildly to do that.
No, right. I'm going to go tonk, tonk, tonk. I'm using it like a small hammer with precise. But when I'm swinging an axe, it's both hands up, both hands down.
Well, and also it's hard to tell, obviously, exactly what happened because of investigation methods back in the day.
Yeah.
The only thing that they can do is piece together kind of what happened. And I hate to say that it makes it even more brutal, but if they were not killed instantly at the same time, there is evidence that the killer did come back because on Joe Moore's side of the bed, the pillow had become soaked with blood. It ran off the side. One of Sarah's shoes was right there, and it had blood in it as well as on the side, and it was tipped over when they had investigated the scene, giving investigators the idea that the shoe was upright when the blood began to pull into it, and then somebody came back to do more damage and kicked it over in the process. So,
or could have come back to check to make sure they were dead.
I think it has to do with more of not defensive wounds. I'm sorry. The wounds inflicted as well were studied. That's how they know that it was 20 to 30 different times. I could not find anything on an autopsy I don't think I wanted to read them, but anyways, let me present something else before we get too far down into this rabbit hole of it being a woman. We did an investigation there. And had and I know that Linda is in the comments right now. Linda was present, and we had another person there, Tanya, as well. I walked inside, and I started investigating with my spirit dice in the downstairs bedroom where Lena and Ina were killed. And I got some of the most amazing communication I have ever experienced at an investigation. And I just wanted to ask them, like, hey, I picked up my dice, and I opened the circle and I said, what happened in this room. And this is all on video, though. I do need to get permission from the owner of the video if we can possibly post it to our Patreon or something like that in its entirety so that everybody can see. But I pulled screenshots from the video because, again, it wasn't my video that was taken, so I didn't feel right just posting it up. I am involved in it, however. So I said, what happened in this room? And in the first throw that I got was man axe us bed.
Using almost all the letters.
Using almost all the letters. Like that is, to me, is, yeah, all but two, I think.
All but two. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So we just got permission live to be able to post up. So we'll post it up to our Patreon in its entirety. Unfiltered and all that stuff. Thank you, Linda. So I got man axe us bed. And I was like, oh my God, holy shit. Linda's in the room with me. Tanya is at this point as well. And we just start talking. We're like, can you please explain to us? Like, I know it's hard. Like, can you please explain to us, if you're willing, to tell us what happened that night? It went on and on to say that this was a brute of a man. They did not know him. He used an axe. It happened very quickly. They did not suffer a lot from it. They weren't in an immense amount of pain. But I said, can you give me the process, basically? And I am paraphrasing and getting some of it out of order, but this was all information gathered. Basically, they said that they heard everything that was happening upstairs, that the family upstairs were the ones that were taken care of first, which lends into the theory that the killer was in the attic and hid in the attic based on how they progressed through the house and the 2 cigarette butts found up there. Lena and Ina said that they heard everything. And whenever that happened, Lena put Ina, we got the next one to throw was that Ina was in the closet. They put Ina in the closet, and I actually found in a book, I believe it was Villisca by Roy Marshall. Thank you, Linda, for letting me borrow that. That said that there was a footprint, a larger footprint, greasy footprint found in the closet.
I just had an epiphany.
So hold on, let me get through this real quick because they said Lena was put in the closet. The killer walked past the room, saw them there, walked into the room, pulled Ina from the closet, put her in the bed, and that's where the killing took place at that point. So where do we stand on that, though? Go with your epiphany first, Chad.
So it just kind of hit me when you started talking about the attic. And again, put yourself in evil man mode.
Mm-hmm.
You know who's in the house.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me ask you this. If you know who's in that house, who do you kill first?
The man.
The father.
The father.
And he was the only one with the sharp end of the stick.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Which means you had to make sure his ass died real fast because he's the threat.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But here, let me flip it on you. What happens when you swing an axe into a bed and a head that's sharp? Sucker gets stuck.
So after I've never done it, so I can't tell you.
Well,
just by chopping wood,
okay.
that's why you
so
put
I've
it on
been
a
on a farm
stick.
and I've had to dispatch animals before.
Okay.
And you
All
dispatch an animal,
yes.
It'll get stuck. So if you now go, oh shit, I can't get my axe out while the person next to him is waking up, you don't repeat that mistake and you flip the axe over.
And then the rest of them are done with the blunt end of the stick. Because
so there is
stuck. Almost every single report of the crimes and stuff says that Joe Moore is the one that has to be killed first. He is
absolutely. If I'm going in and I'm going to kill this group, I have to take out the threat first. I mean, they teach you that in self-defense. Like and even in gun defense, it's everybody gets one before anybody gets seconds, but you also take out your biggest threat first.
Shelly.
Everybody gets one.
A good analogy, but I mean, I get it.
Yeah.
I get it.
So you got to think, maybe he gave everybody a good whack to get them, completely. They're not dead, but they're marginally incapacitated and no longer a threat. And now you come back and finish them off.
Yeah.
That's how I would have done it. I mean, it's morbid to think about it that way, but golly, it just hit me like a ton of bricks.
Well, and here's the thing too that I find very interesting is that if someone, let's throw it back to what's our guy who owned half the town?
Frank Jones.
Okay, let's say, just for fun, that Frank Jones was pissed off that Moore took his biggest client, John Deere. And perhaps he is kind of a mafioso type and he sends somebody to kill them. again, the house could potentially have been unlocked. Was not uncommon in a small town to leave your doors unlocked.
Mm-hmm.
Whoever that is goes in, and they're expecting 4 children and 2 adults.
Mm-hmm.
They find 6 children.
Mm-hmm.
I do agree that I think that they started with the father. They did start upstairs, and now they have to handle everything. And I do think it is my opinion, if we're going with a male as the aggressor and the killer in this, I do think that the little girls downstairs woke up, and being that they were in an unfamiliar place, I do believe they tried to hide. I do believe that they were unable to be quiet because little children that are scared, that are running to hide, will make noise, will alert that person that they are there. And that person came down because, in for a penny, in for a pound, there can be no witnesses, right?
Right. Unfortunately.
So
Yeah.
I do believe, and when we first went in there, I was immediately drawn to that closet. I said, "There's something wrong with that closet." I didn't know what was wrong with that closet, but that was the first place I went, was that closet. And then
Yeah.
whenever you got the thing about the little girl in, whenever you threw the dice and you got the little girl in the closet, and then we found out that there was a greasy shoe print in there. Now, how much credence can we give that? Not a
Right.
whole lot,
Exactly. I know.
because the scene was trampled through. But it will tell you, when we go into that house, the room where the Stillinger girls slept has a lot more weight. It has a
Yeah,
lot more
it does.
emotion. It has a lot more energy. I think that's because they were conscious and they heard the whole thing, and
Yeah.
they had no idea what to do in unfamiliar surroundings. Probably wouldn't have disobeyed. We're told, you stay in the room, y'all are sleeping here. Probably thought they had to stay in the room, and all
Yeah.
they could think to do was hide.
Yeah.
So,
So I'm going to start with my final thoughts on this
alrighty.
case.
Final thoughts.
Yeah. So my final thoughts are, I dismiss the Frank Jones theory. It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't add up. I can see where it, I'm just not convinced. That's my thing. I'm not convinced that a rivalry over John Deere was the reason. This man was wealthy, prominent, politically, whatever hierarchy of everything. He had already done well for himself after Joe left and went independent in the farm implementing business. I don't see any need for it. I also have to dismiss the man from the train theory, or a transient from the train theory. Because here's the thing, where the Moore household sits, a lot of it is told wrong when they say it's not far from the railroad track. It's true, it's not, but that makes it sound like it sits right next to a railroad track, and it doesn't. So a lot of people think that this man jumps off the train, kills the family, jumps on the next train. The issue is you have a town of 2,500 people. They're killed sometime, a lot of reports call it around midnight on June 10th, 1912. Some place it a little bit later, but we're wee hours in the morning. It's a 10-minute walk through the middle of town in a place of 2,500 people. You got to be pretty lucky, if you're a transient in bloody clothes, to walk 10 minutes from the north side of town, completely through town, past all these houses, because they're not on the outskirts of town. They're in town. They're 2 blocks down from the public square, and get past all these people of 2,500 residents to be able to wait for the next train, to board the next train, to get off of the next train in your bloody clothes, go where you need. It doesn't add up to me either.
Yeah, there was a second site they had to clean themselves up.
Exactly. There has to be something, there has to be a second place where the clothes are dumped, or somebody's going to see something. It's just, you have to be an incredibly lucky person if that's going to happen. For me, that goes back to the one and only person that remains plausible, in my opinion, which is Reverend Kelly. He says that he couldn't sleep. I understand that the confession was recanted. I get it. But why do you willingly go and surrender yourself? Why do you willingly go and surrender yourself and say, I'm going to confess? And I understand about false confessors. I get that. I'm probably going to get a lot of comments about false confessor, coerced into it. I understand all that. But in my mind, the action of going to surrender yourself for the crimes, these Villisca murders.
That's confession too.
That is confession as well. He went at a police station whenever that happened. He willingly walked to the authorities and surrendered himself and said, I did the murders. Now, the confession that takes place afterwards, it could have been coerced. It could have been forced out of him. It's a pretty wild, fantastical, confession that he comes up with. I'm not going to say he comes up with or presents, but we've heard crazier, let's be honest, in the true crime stories that we talked about and convictions that happened. We've heard crazier.
All right.
So my final thoughts are going to go back to Reverend George Kelly. I cannot prove that he is the one that did it. There is no evidence linking him or anything like that. I understand that I have to rest on logical crossing off of the other theories, and what am I left with at that point? I will say that your woman theory, Shelley, very strong contender to that. Very strong contender. However, I think that the kerosene lamps were placed there in hopes that the house would burn down.
I agree.
I think that's what it was. So that's my final thoughts on it. What about you two?
All right, Mr. Wandell, final thoughts?
Yeah, with all of this kind of looking together and looking at some of the pictures of the house, I've noticed that attic externally would have been rather easy to get into.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm looking at the house right now. I could have climbed the side of the house in 10 seconds, popped that attic window open, because oftentimes those were actually on a swivel, slid right in, and I'm waiting. You'd have never known I was there. And yeah, Dad's going first, and I think crap happened, and but I think everybody got one before they went back and made sure everybody was dead.
Yeah.
And either bloodlust came on, or shit, I got to make sure these people, I distract them so much with the horrificness of this that they never even come looking for me.
Yeah.
Because how could I be involved in something like that? And so I think there might be some of that mentality at play, is like, look how horrific this is. But
yeah.
The one thing I would like to say to everybody is, if you ever think God is talking to you and he shows up as darkness, that's not God. In every account of a Bible, God has never showed up as darkness. It's always been light. Period.
Yeah.
Full stop. So there you
go. Let me put in, before Shelley, you give your final thoughts, because I have a couple of comments over on YouTube that I just want to add this. Mary Peckham, the next door neighbor, did die 6 months after these murders. The contributing to her death were the horrific events and the nervous breakdown that she experienced from it. Everybody said that the events, that she might have actually possibly heard something that's not confirmed. I don't want that put on the record that it's confirmed. She might have possibly heard something, and she suffered a nervous breakdown. 6 months later, she ended up passing away. George Kelly actually died in 1959 in Islip State Hospital, which is a massive psychiatric institution in New York, and he is buried in the Bronx. So I wanted to...
or maybe she died because she couldn't handle the guilt of doing it.
Could have. I don't think that Mary Peckham was involved.
I think it was potentially her daughter.
Yeah.
And maybe
ahead,
she
Shelley.
had knowledge. Perhaps her daughter had confessed to her. She had seen her daughter come in the bloody clothing, which is why she had to go check the next morning and see if that door was locked and see what it was. She was the first one. And anyway, so my final thoughts on this is, the weasel, Weasley guy, Kelly, he I think he's a very good contender, mainly because he is of slighter build. Perhaps he would have had trouble handling an axe. He did confess. However, there is no motive. There is no motive. And you need motive, opportunity. And yes, did he have opportunity? Of course, he was in a room by himself, left alone, while the rest of the other two were outside. And he could have slipped out, slipped in, cleaned up, and put those clothes away, and then gone on to the train station with no one being the wiser. I think that the confession was for 15 minutes of fame. His whole lifestyle was built around a lie. He was not a pastor, but he presented himself as one. He wanted the fame. He wanted the attention, and he was prone to lying. Just purely because he presented as a pastor. Go ahead, what, Chad?
Is there any reason that we know of why he was never granted to be ordained? Was he rejected?
Not that I'm aware of. I know a lot of things that, from my understanding, do not quote me completely on this. This is my understanding of context clues in the articles that I read. I believe that it was improper action or improper advancements on a female.
Okay, so he was a bit of a masher. Okay,
now, I
gotcha.
will say this: having experienced an issue with someone that was a predator, watching them go through the actions and seeing it on video, you guys know what I'm talking about. Seeing this person be physically removed from a place to only come back and sneak in to try to commit a crime, I can say that's motive enough. And this guy had a thing for kids.
Yeah.
That would have been his motive. I mean,
Right.
but I mean, we can't think like normal people would think. Why would you? No, that would be the motive. Is I'm going to sneak in. I'm going to kill mom and dad. I'm going to have my way with these boys or the girls, and then I'm going to kill them all too.
Yeah.
But again, we also know the predators like to isolate their victims. It would be rare to get. You have now 4 children, and now you have 6 children in the same place.
Unless they're dead.
Unless they're dead, right? But anyway, so let me finish my final thought here. I think it is far more likely that the true killer is someone that nobody ever thought to look at, and that would have been a female. I just think it all lines up. The ability to stay in the small space, the amount of cleanup. I do think that the house was an attempt to burn down, and I think that is they attempted to burn down not only the kerosene lamps with no globe over them to protect the fire, also the fact that there was things burned in the oven or the stove, which again makes no sense to me. I think that was just the paperwork that was found and was pushed into the stove to light it in an attempt, because we all know when you burn paper can go up chimneys and onto roofs and catch houses on fire if large enough pieces go. Mm-hmm. So I do think it was an attempt to burn down the house to conceal the crime, and I think more than likely, I think it was a woman. So, and with that,
I was going to say we've got woman, Reverend Ewing, and this side of the chat, and you were.
I could go either way, and I honestly think this may have been somebody they knew because they seemed pretty intimately familiar with
familiarity. The girl next door.
Yeah.
So, and with that, Blake, why don't you tell them everything they need to know?
All right. Sounds good. Thanks for sticking with us on this longer one tonight, guys. If you want to support the show directly, check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/EVP podcast. For just $5 a month, you will unlock over 500 Patreon exclusive videos, including the pre and post broadcast, as well as some raw, unedited paranormal investigation footage, like we're going to post up this spirit dice session. Thank you, Linda, for allowing us to post that. So you do get an additional hour with us each week, as well as some bonus videos as well. Your support from this goes directly back to the show and towards the adventures that we bring you week after week. And if you're not sure about joining Patreon, try it risk-free with our 7-day free trial. Also, while you're there, go under our recommended tab and check out the Old Park Hotel Patreon page. You are able to have access to 24/7, 365 ghost TV of all the paranormal happenings happening in Old Park Hotel in Ballinger.
It's addictive.
And we're fully booked this month, so there's a lot of crap going on.
Yes. So I believe, Chad, you're up to 15 cameras, 12 cameras?
15
cameras that you can watch 24/7, 365. So make sure you check them out as well. Make sure you stay connected with us on Facebook, YouTube, many more by searching everything Vaguely Paranormal and looking for that green sound wave. You can also find the Old Park Hotel on all of those channels, as well as Ghost Geeks, which is the team that Chad and Leslie have founded and are a part of. Remember, you can catch us live every Tuesday night, 8 p.m. Central Standard Time on Facebook and YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to our Eventbrite page to be notified when public investigation tickets go on sale. We do have upcoming events at the Old Park Hotel in Ballinger, Texas, as well as investigations at Broadhead Manor in Broadhead, Wisconsin. So go and check those out. And don't forget to follow us on our Facebook and X profiles Wednesday morning, 9 a.m. Central Standard Time. We will post our link tree, which will have all of the links for everything Vaguely Paranormal. Those are also going to be in your notes for you audio listeners. And we are grateful for your continued support. Every like, comment, share, and download keeps the adventures alive. So if you have a favorite episode, share it with your friends. One of the easiest things you can do to help out our show and its rankings, wherever you get your audio from, head over there and download our episodes, our entire catalog. That is it. And leave us a review if you'd like. If you have a story, comment, or question, or you'd like to be a guest on the show or have us as guests on your show, email us at the evppod@gmail.com. That is THEEVPPOD@gmail.com.
Go like, share, and subscribe to that YouTube channel. Give us a thumbs up, say hello, and let us know you were here. And share it to your friends.
Absolutely. Well, y'all, thank y'all for joining us for another weekly episode of Everything Vaguely Paranormal. For myself, I'm Blake Smith, my partner in the paranormal, Miss Shelley Pruitt, and our special fill-in co-host for tonight, Mr. Chad Wandell. We appreciate you again. We love you. And as always, we will see you next Tuesday.
Bye-bye.
Bye.